George Washington, Part 2, Soldier of Empire and Father of his Country, 1754-1883. Chapter 5, Trial by Fire, 7 Years' War and Military Apprenticeship. George Washington's first real test as a military leader came in 1754 when he marched into the Ohio country at the head of a small Virginia force. The mission, authorized by Governor Robert Dinwiddie, aimed to assert British claims and, if possible, block the French from strengthening their position at the forks of the Ohio. Washington, only in his early 20s, was now a lieutenant colonel whose actions would carry consequences far beyond what he or his superiors fully anticipated. In late May 1754, Washington's scouting parties learned that a French detachment was nearby. Acting on this intelligence, he led a surprise attack at a place that became known as Jumonville Glen. The skirmish was brief but bloody. Several Frenchmen were killed, including the officer in command, Ensign Jumonville, and others were captured. The circumstances of Jumonville's death, whether he was killed in battle or after attempting to deliver a diplomatic summons, would be hotly debated and used by the French to accuse the British of ambush and murder. For Washington, it was a shock. His first engagement had ignited a wider conflict rather than merely enforcing Virginia's claims. Realizing that French retaliation was likely, Washington hastily constructed a small defensive position he named Fort Necessity in a low-lying meadow at Great Meadows. The fort's location and design were far from ideal. It was exposed and vulnerable to attack from higher ground and heavy rain. In early July, a larger French and indigenous force descended on Fort Necessity. After hours of fighting in pouring rain, with ammunition wet and casualties mounting, Washington agreed to surrender terms. The capitulation document, drafted in French, included language suggesting that he admitted to assassinating Jumonville, phrasing he later claimed not to have fully understood. The defeat at Fort Necessity was a humiliating baptism by fire. Yet from Washington's perspective, it also provided hard-earned lessons. He saw the importance of terrain, fortification, supply, and clear communication. He experienced firsthand the complexities of coordinating with indigenous allies and interpreting their motives, and he realized that his own judgment, while bold, needed tempering with greater caution and experience. Despite this setback, Washington's military career did not end. When British General Edward Braddock arrived in 1755 to lead a major expedition against the French, Washington volunteered to serve as an aide-de-camp. Although he did not receive the royal commission he desired, working closely with Braddock offered another opportunity to learn European-style warfare from a professional officer. Braddock's expedition, however, revealed stark contrasts between European tactics and American conditions. The army moved slowly through the wilderness, cutting roads and adhering to rigid formations. Washington and other colonial officers warned that such methods made the column vulnerable to ambush in dense forests. Their concerns proved tragically prescient at the Battle of the Monongahela, when French and indigenous forces attacked the extended British line. Confusion and panic swept through the ranks as red-coated soldiers, unaccustomed to fighting without clear formations, suffered heavy casualties. Amid the chaos, Washington displayed composure. He rode back and forth, carrying orders and trying to rally retreating troops, even as bullets tore through his coat and killed horses beneath him. His efforts helped organize a rearguard that allowed remnants of the force to withdraw. Braddock was mortally wounded, and the expedition ended in disaster. In the aftermath, see stories of Washington's bravery, how he seemed miraculously unharmed despite enemy fire, circulated widely in the colonies. These tales added to his growing reputation. More importantly, the experience reinforced his conviction that tactics must adapt to local conditions, and that overconfidence in European methods could be fatal in America's forests and hills. The 7 Years' War continued, and Washington remained involved in frontier defense and later in successful operations against French strongholds, including the eventual capture of Fort Duquesne, rebuilt by the British as Fort Pitt. He gained further experience in organizing campaigns, training militia, and dealing with colonial politics and British command structures. Yet he also accumulated frustrations. Colonial officers were often denied equal rank and pay with British regulars. Their commissions didn't carry the same honor. Washington's attempts to obtain a royal commission failed, leaving him resentful of perceived slights and more aware of the unequal relationship between metropole and colony. By the war's end, Washington had emerged as one of Virginia's most experienced military figures, but he was also ready to step away from active service. His health had suffered, and the limits imposed on colonial officers convinced him that further advancement in the British Army was unlikely. He resigned his commission and returned to civilian life, bringing with him a store of knowledge about war and leadership that would prove invaluable in the Revolutionary era. Upon leaving military service, Washington turned his attention to building a stable and prestigious civilian life. In 1759, he married Martha Dandridge Custis, a wealthy widow with 2 young children. Martha brought substantial property and enslaved workers to the marriage, greatly increasing Washington's wealth and responsibilities. Their union was by all accounts affectionate and respectful, though also shaped by the practical considerations of status and estate management that guided many elite colonial marriages. The couple settled at Mount Vernon, the plantation on the Potomac River that Washington would expand and refine over the years. He devoted himself to improving the estate's productivity and appearance. Moving away from exclusive reliance on tobacco, he experimented with crop rotation, wheat, and other ventures, reflecting both soil exhaustion and a desire to diversify income. He invested in mills, fisheries, and other enterprises, demonstrating an entrepreneurial streak. Managing Mount Vernon meant overseeing enslaved laborers, hired workers, and tenants. Washington's daily life involved detailed supervision, keeping accounts, directing planning and harvest cycles, and planning construction and maintenance. He rose early, rode the property, and maintained voluminous records. His approach was practical and empirical, influenced by agricultural manuals and correspondence with other planners. He was always looking for more efficient methods. At the same time, Washington began to establish himself as a political figure. He served in the Virginia House of Burgesses, the colonial legislature, representing his local county. In this role, he observed debates over taxation, defense, and westward expansion. Initially quiet in legislative sessions, he preferred to work behind the scenes, building relationships and establishing a reputation for seriousness and integrity rather than oratory. Socially, Washington and his wife hosted guests, participated in the social circuits of Virginia's gentry, and occasionally traveled to Williamsburg, the colonial capital. These activities reinforced his public profile and connected him to influential networks. Over time, he became known not only as a former military officer and successful planner, but also as a reliable representative of his region's interests. The period between the end of the 7 Years' War and the onset of the imperial crisis in the 1760s was thus a time of consolidation for Washington. He refined his estate, strengthened his social standing, and gained experience in colonial self-government. Yet events beyond his control were brewing that would draw him back into the realm of high politics and conflict. The conclusion of the 7 Years' War left Britain with a vast empire, but also with significant debts and security challenges. Seeking revenue and greater control over the colonies, Parliament passed measures such as the Sugar Act, Stamp Act, and later the Townshend Duties. These policies sought to tax colonial trade and legal transactions, asserting Parliament's authority over the colonies in new ways. From Washington's perspective, as a Virginia planter and legislator, these changes were unsettling. While he initially expressed loyalty to the crown and to the idea of a unified empire, he shared his fellow colonists' concern that taxation without colonial representation in Parliament violated traditional English rights. He worried that if unchecked, such measures could extend to property and self-government in ways that undermined the autonomy Virginians valued. Washington supported non-importation agreements and other forms of economic protest, aligning himself with leading patriot figures in Virginia. He increasingly framed the dispute as one about constitutional rights rather than mere financial burdens. At the same time, British restrictions on Western settlement, such as the Proclamation of 1763, clashed with his interests as a land speculator and advocate of frontier expansion. He saw these limits as unfair constraints on colonial opportunity. As tensions escalated in the 1770s, particularly after the Boston Tea Party and the Coercive Acts, Washington's stance hardened. He viewed the punitive actions against Massachusetts as an attack on colonial liberties more broadly. Within Virginia, he participated in conventions that coordinated protest and prepared for possible conflict. The language of rights, liberties, and resistance to arbitrary power resonated with his own experiences of being treated as a lesser partner within the empire. Washington assumed command of the Continental Army outside Boston in July 1775. He found an enthusiastic but disorganized force, militia units from different colonies, unevenly equipped and trained with varying levels of discipline. The challenge was to turn this collection of volunteers into a functioning army capable of facing one of the world's most powerful military establishments. His first campaign achieved a notable success. Through a patient siege and clever use of artillery placed on Dorchester Heights, Washington compelled the British to evacuate Boston in March 1776. This victory boosted American morale and seemed to validate his leadership. But the war's course soon grew far more difficult. In the summer and fall of 1776, British forces launched a massive offensive against New York. Washington's army suffered a series of defeats on Long Island and Manhattan, forced into retreat under pressure from superior numbers and naval power. The losses exposed shortcomings in American training, organization, and command. Washington himself made missteps, including overcommitting to holding certain positions and underestimating British maneuver capabilities. By late 1776, the Continental Army had retreated across New Jersey into Pennsylvania. Desertions increased, supplies dwindled, and the cause appeared in jeopardy. Yet, Washington refused to concede defeat. In a daring move at the end of December, he led his troops across the ice-choked Delaware River at night to surprise Hessian forces at Trenton. The victory, followed by another engagement at Princeton, revived patriot morale and demonstrated that the American army could strike effectively even after setbacks. Over the next several years, Washington's strategic approach matured. He recognized that trying to win the war through large, decisive battles against a stronger foe was less important than keeping his army intact and prolonging the conflict until political and international factors shifted in America's favor. He often chose to avoid unnecessary risks, trading ground for time when needed. This patience sometimes frustrated contemporaries who desired more aggressive action, but it ultimately helped preserve the Continental Army as a symbol and instrument of resistance. The winter encampment at Valley Forge in 1777-1778 became emblematic of the Army's resilience. Enduring shortages of food, clothing, and shelter, Washington's troops suffered terribly. Yet under his leadership and with the crucial training regimen introduced by Baron Friedrich von Steuben, The army emerged more disciplined and capable. Washington used this period not only to maintain morale, but also to advocate with Congress and state governments for better supply systems and stronger central coordination. Politically, Washington navigated internal challenges as well. Some officers and politicians, dissatisfied with the pace of victory, flirted with the idea of replacing him with a more aggressive commander. The so-called Conway Cabal, a loose collection of critics, briefly threatened his position. Washington responded with calm dignity, avoiding open confrontation, but making clear to key supporters his awareness of the intrigues. His steady behavior, combined with loyalty from influential figures and the lack of a clearly superior alternative, allowed him to retain command. As the war progressed, Washington's role increasingly involved coordination with allies. The French alliance after 1778 brought naval and ground forces that altered the strategic balance. Working with French commanders, Washington planned operations that culminated in the Yorktown campaign. In 1781, he seized the opportunity when British General Cornwallis entrenched his forces at Yorktown, Virginia. Moving his army south and cooperating with a French fleet that blocked British escape by sea, Washington oversaw the siege that forced Cornwallis's surrender. Yorktown did not immediately end the war, but it effectively broke British political will to continue large-scale operations. For Washington, it vindicated years of perseverance, adapting strategy, and holding the army together under harsh conditions. He became widely seen, both in America and abroad, as the central figure in the American struggle for independence. Perhaps equally important was what Washington chose not to do at the war's end. As victory approached, some officers, frustrated by unpaid wages and uncertain about the new nation's stability, murmured about using the army's power to secure their demands. In the Newburgh Conspiracy of 1783, Washington confronted this unrest directly, appealing to officers' sense of honor and sacrifice. In a famous moment, he donned spectacles and remarked on his own aging in service of the cause, moving many to tears and diffusing the crisis. Shortly thereafter, Washington resigned his commission and returned control of the army to civilian authorities. This act, rare in history, impressed observers as a powerful statement of Republican principle. The general who could have seized power instead relinquished it. From the American perspective, Washington's decision confirmed his status not only as a successful military leader, but as a guardian of the ideals for which the Revolution had been fought. By 1783, Washington had completed an extraordinary transformation. He had entered the 7 Years' War as an ambitious young provincial officer seeking advancement within the British Empire. He emerged from the Revolutionary War as the foremost figure in an independent United States, revered for his leadership, restraint, and dedication to the new republic. The next phase of his life would require a different kind of service, helping to design and lead a national government capable of sustaining the independence he had helped win,